She's an icon, she's a saint, which means she's sort of two-dimensional in the story that we all know. But it suddenly occurred to me to be interested in finding out a bit more, really to do with my last book, She-Wolves, where I'd been talking about powerful women whose power was inhibited and limited by the fact that they couldn't lead armies on the battlefield. And I suddenly thought, Joan of Arc, the one woman who did, in 15th century Europe, lead armies on the battlefield to extraordinary effect. Who was she? Not the saint, but the human being. It's the real Joan that I'm interested in. There is an extraordinary amount of information about Joan of Arc still surviving, but mainly it's two truly remarkable documents. One is the transcript of her trial, the trial that condemned her to death in 1431, in which we get pages of testimony of Joan herself speaking. And then 25 years later, there was another trial to undo the verdict of the first one and declare her innocent after all. And in that trial, we hear testimony from lots of people who knew her, people who'd grown up with her in Domremy, people who'd fought alongside her, and people who'd been involved in the first trial that condemned her. They are fascinating documents. We tend to think of Joan of Arc as the woman who led France to victory against the English. She's France's national heroine. But actually the story's a lot more complicated than that. England and France were at war, but France was also at war with itself. A civil war had been going on in France for 20 years before Joan ever appeared on the political scene. So we need to understand how bitter and how brutal that conflict was, and how there was no foregone conclusion that France, as we know it today, was going to carry on existing. If we understand that, we understand a lot more about the complexities of the world in which Joan lived. I think that's absolutely true. I think if we look at a saint, a legend, they have an existence that's almost beyond the human. We stop asking about the reality of their lives and how they thought and felt in three dimensions, if you like. But if we think about a world in which a terrible civil war is going on, in which there's also an invading power, it's almost as though in our Wars of the Roses, the French had invaded and the Lancastrians or the Yorkists had been allied with them. If we think about the complexities of that world, and then imagine a teenage girl arriving from a small village far away saying, God has sent me to lead the army. How on earth did that happen? And why did anyone listen to her? I think that makes her all the more remarkable. I have loved every minute of living in 15th century France. It's such a rich landscape to explore. Extraordinary characters, not just Joan herself, but her Dauphin, the Duke of Burgundy on the other side, the men with whom she fought, whether noblemen or professional soldiers. It's a world that in some ways is very understandable in human terms, and in other ways is strange and exotic. Some of the descriptions of the Duke of Burgundy's wedding feast, for example, the contemporary description goes on for pages, but all you need to know is that a sheep that's been dyed blue with golden horns jumps out of a pie in the middle of the feast, and you're transported to a different world. But it's the human reality that really absorbs me, and above all, trying to be there with Joan, to see the world through her eyes and see her through the eyes of the people who knew her. That is endlessly fascinating.